You're known as the father of functional medicine. How did this happen, and how did we find ourselves here with such a significant movement for functional medicine behind you?
Meet Dr. Jeffrey Bland, founder of the functional medicine movement. He is a global leader transforming health through science, innovation, and immune wellness. You're listening to the Health Optimization Podcast.
People have a misunderstanding of the immune system. And when I say people, I mean even doctors. Our immune system is unbelievably intelligent. It has the ability to set us against all odds in our universe to have 100 or more years of healthy living. Our genes tell us what we can be, but they don't tell us who we will be. There are many we's that are potential within our genes. The we that becomes us is an outcome that relates to how we're treating our genes. What is our environment? What is our lifestyle? Who do we hang out with? What kind of conversations do we have? What are we exposed to?
On average, American adults are on around 4 prescription medications daily. Where do you think functional medicine goes from this point? Like, where do you think it's going? Dr. Jeffrey Bland, I am very excited to have you on the show after all of these years of following your work. So welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you, Tim. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I really love what you're doing with health optimization. What a great platform to explore and to assist people in leveraging some of the things that now are really making a difference in not only the quality of life, but the quantity of life. So this is a pleasure to have a chance to talk with you.
Thank you very much for saying so. I mean, you're known as the father of functional medicine. And, you know, in 1991, you and your wife founded the Institute for Functional Medicine. Now, it's a significant piece in the health world these days. And as we said just before we started recording, it's like things like biological dentistry and all the other areas of medicine seem to now be coming into the mindset of functional medicine, which I absolutely love. And, you know, some of the guys that really look up to you because you've led the way is, you know, Mark Hyman and Terry Wahls and Fitzgerald and David Perlmutter. And the list keeps going on and on and on with all of these people, which is fantastic. But how did this happen, and how did we find ourselves here with such a significant movement for functional medicine behind you?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. It really is pretty amazing to me as well. I have to say that when we started down this road in 1989, I had no idea when we finally came up with the concept in 1990 and started in the Institute for Functional Medicine in 1991 with a variety of my colleagues from around the world, people that I'd had the privilege of meeting. I have in my life traveled over 6 million miles. I know that sounds crazy. It is actually. No rational human being would decide they want to travel 6 million miles, but it's just what happened in the course of my life that I got the opportunity to meet all these remarkable people around the world. And so when we started the Institute, and now I guess, you know, with that year number, now that we're in 2024, I'd almost be called the grandfather of functional medicine, because I now have sons and daughters who have graduated from medical school and health sciences coming to our meetings that their parents were my students back when we started. So I guess I'm now the grandfather. I just had my 78th birthday, and it's hard to believe how time flies by. But I think that what happened was I started off as an academic. I was a medical school professor. I started doing a lot of research around the question of how people got sick, not just what we call their sickness, but what were the cellular mechanisms that gave rise to many chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, dementia, digestive problems, and so forth, and trying to find out if there was a central series of processes that were related to these chronic illnesses. And I obviously had a chance then to engage in discussions with a lot of researchers and clinicians and people that were opinion leaders that were coming up with interesting ideas. And in consolidating those ideas together, I eventually came to the thought that these were all related to understanding the function of a person, their physical function, their metabolic function, their cognitive function, and their behavioral function. And so I started thinking that, you know, there's nowhere in medicine presently, that's 1990, where this concept of function is really taken seriously. We are always worried about what is the disease and get a diagnosis and focused on the endpoint rather than talking about how the person got there, the upstream events, the root cause, so to speak, which is tied to their function. And in fact, when I spoke with people in the clinic and in research that I've been involved with, I always found out that their definition of health was not just the absence of disease. It was related to things that were related to their function. They wanted to do something. They wanted to be better at certain things. They could be in an older age. It could be going to the graduation of their grandchild. It could be climbing a mountain. It could be running a marathon. It could be being better at composing music or writing computer code or whatever it could be. For that individual, that was what they defined as health. And so when I started listening to them, I recognized that every one of those aspirations was really not tied to a disease. It was tied to a function. That if we could somehow optimize function, that maybe that was the definition of what health was all about. So I convinced my colleagues in 1990 that we would rally around this term function. I didn't know at the time, and shame on me, I should have, because I consider myself a pretty good student of the medical literature. I follow it very carefully. I'm kind of a historian of medical progress. But it turned out that years after we formed the Institute for Functional Medicine, it probably was 5 or 6 years actually, one of our members came to me and said, "So Jeff, do you realize that there was an article in the 1845 issue of the Lancet Medical Magazine on functional medicine, written by the head professor dean at Birmingham University Medical School around what he called functional medicine?" I thought, oh no, I was unaware of that article. Clearly we got the article and read it, and it was, it was in the English of the 19th century, but it was very, very similar philosophically to what we had come up with in the 20th century about functional medicine. The difference was that we had a lot more tools that he did not have to understand the mechanisms at the cellular tissue level. So we were able to put more kind of, I guess you'd call it, basic fundamental support for the model. But I have to give credit that actually the concept of functional medicine predated me by more than 100 years. So now we're carrying the ball forward.
I can't believe you missed a paper from over 100 years ago.
Yeah, I should not have. That's for sure.
Shame on you. Wow. No, that's amazing. That's amazing that, it came into alignment. It's fantastic that someone had this idea of thinking, and then you found your way to it as well. So it's a really nice part of the story, actually. So for those that are listening, that this is the first time they've heard of functional medicine, how does the approach of functional medicine differ from standard medicine, Chinese medicine, or any of the other standard pharmaceutical side of things?
I'm a product of a traditional medical school education, and I think my colleagues and I, including a lot of the way that doctors are trained today. So I'm a product of education in the 1960s, but it hasn't changed in terms of philosophy too much since the 1960s. The driving force is to learn how to diagnose and treat a disease. It's a disease-centric model. It's all focused on what do you call that set of symptoms that patient has. You give it a name, a disease. And from that, there's then some kind of a standard protocol, generally utilizes either surgery, radiotherapy, or pharmaceuticals to treat that specific condition. So you're looking at an end stage of a process when you are really in the traditional medical model. And by the way, I need to say there's nothing wrong with that model. In fact, there are many things that are good about that model. Certainly, if you're seriously injured or you have a terminal illness that is jeopardizing your life, you want the best emergency rescue thoughts about how to remediate that as possible. And so our medicine is really quite good at that, quite honestly. And we're in a better state of treating those end-stage diseases today than any time in the human history. But, and here's the big but, when you look at healthcare expenditures, and it's similar in the UK as it is here in the United States, more than 70% of the dollars that are spent on healthcare are spent on chronic conditions that don't fall easily into a simple diagnosis. They have multiple symptoms that come with multiple severities, with different degrees of duration and frequency. And so these often fall into categories that we call kind of unexplained illnesses. What do we do with them? And so this might be things like pre-diabetes, or metabolic syndrome. It might be things like chronic fatigue, myalgia encephalitis, or ME. It might be things like pre-autoimmune disease. It might be things like cognitive impairment well before you have Alzheimer's disease. So these conditions constitute the majority of healthcare expenditures because we are using, unfortunately, a disease model to treat a chronic symptom that's really functional, that doesn't really sync up. The drugs that we would use for an acute disease don't, we say, well, we'll just use a lower dose of those for these conditions. And no, they don't really work. If you look at the outcome studies of the application of those disease-related therapies for the treatment of these chronic illnesses, their outcomes are not that good. And so it begs the question, is there another way of approaching these chronic conditions? Is there something else that we need to look at? And of course, that is the birthing of the functional medicine model. It tries to go upstream. It tries to go to root cause. It tries to look at the uniqueness in that individual's, how their genes are interacting with their lifestyle, their environment, their foods, their social interactions, and try to then define a personalized understanding of their thumbprint as to why those chronic symptoms are there. And so individualizing the treatment to their specific needs rather than just treating them as a disease entity with a standard class of drugs that really, in the end, for these chronic conditions are not that successful.
It's a very interesting point. So my friend Martin Tobias used to run Upgrade Labs once upon a time. I'm not sure if you've heard of Martin, but anyway, he got into this space who was not in the health space at all prior. And he went to the doctor because he'd hit a certain age, and he said to the doctor, I want to be better. And the doctor said, what's wrong with you? He said, nothing's wrong with me. I just want to be better. He said, well, I can't find anything wrong with you. And then that's when Martin kind of went, yeah, something's not right. I mean, you need to service the car throughout the year as well as, the yearly checkup. It seems funny for me, and again, I'm speaking as a semi-layman, I guess, but is to have a set of symptoms to then give it a label so you could then treat those set of symptoms, but then it's classed as one group of things, which could be something completely different, but it's just got a heuristic of a label, which then attaches you to that label. And then that becomes your identity and then probably not fixed. So it's not individualized. So it's very interesting how these parts all interplay.
Well, Tim, I think you're saying something really important there that, in medicine, the driving force is what's called the differential diagnosis. And the best person in the class that can learn how to diagnose will be the student that gets pushed forward and is considered the top of their class and becomes well respected. And the issue is if you're going into specialty medicine where you're going to be dealing with very severe illnesses that are associated with a specific organ, could be a gastroenterologist, could be a neurologist, could be a cardiologist, could be an endocrinologist, whatever the organ system is. It's good to know a whole lot about one organ. But for people that are in a state of chronic illness, the people that are really best able to answer those questions are maybe the masters of all without being the experts in any one. They understand the system. They understand the network because we are a network. Our organs talk to one another. We don't just work as the liver by itself. We work with the liver connected to the gut, connected to the brain, connected to the heart. And so these constructs of network thinking or systems thinking is the basic underpinning of what functional medicine is all about. And I have to say in my training, and having been a medical school professor for 13 years myself, that's not the way that we have trained students to think as systems. We think of them as organs, a collection of organs. We study an organ and then we shut the textbook and we take a test and then we go to the next organ. And so we look at them kind of, I'm saying this a little bit simplistically, but it's not actually far from the truth that we don't teach docs to actually understand how these things interact, how they communicate with one another, the cell signaling processes that they share in common that ultimately dictate the downstream effects that become our chronic symptoms. Because the symptoms we have are a result of the body doing what it should do. It's trying to tell us that all is not right, that there's something between the way that our body's interacting with our lifestyle and our environment that's not completely synced up correctly. And so that begs the question, what do we need to sync up? We're not going to change our genes. Our genes change the same. However, we can change the way our genes express themselves based on our lifestyles, our thoughts, our diets, our behaviors, our environments. All of these things play very important roles in ultimately determining how we function as a human being.
Your work seems to be, I guess, when it ties in with cellular health, but most focused on the immune system itself. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think, first of all, people have a misunderstanding of the immune system. And when I say people, I mean even doctors. Because I think the average person would, if you ask them the question, what do you think about your immune system? They would say, well, I hope it's working well to protect me against viruses and colds and bacteria and infections. And if it isn't, maybe I'll survive the next pandemic, because I've got an immune system that can defend me against foreign viruses or bacteria. Well, the immune system does do that, so I don't want to discount that as unimportant. It's very important, but it's only one of the multiple properties the immune system has. The immune system is one of two places in the body. And by the way, it interacts with the other one. The other one is the nervous system. So the nervous and the immune system are the only places in the body that translate and communicate with the outside world 24/7, 365 and tell your inside body what's going on in the outside world in real time. And so your immune system is there to do search and repair. It tells your body things that it needs to know as to how to function on a real-time basis beyond just influencing your protection against viruses or bacteria. It is a central executive center along with your nervous system in regulating your overall how you look, act, and feel. And if you start to examine the immune system in much more kind of detail, you come to recognize that the average person who's not sick is making 1 million new immune cells every second. Let me say it again, 1 million new immune cells every second. And then the question is, those ones you're making every second, that become every minute, that become every hour, that become every day, that become every week, are those new cells in your immune system as good, worse, or better than the ones they're replacing? Because every one that comes in, one goes out because they die and they're replaced by new ones. And what happens in our Western culture historically, and I'm now quoting a huge amount of science, so this is just summarizing, is that over time, the average person, more than the average person, the overwhelming majority of people, as they age, their immune system gets older and it becomes senescent. It starts to collect injury. It starts to have bad memories, so that the immune system of tomorrow becomes worse than the immune system of today. And we kind of accept that. We say, well, yeah, when you get older, you're just not as good with your immune system. Why do we accept that? There's nothing in our genes that has ever been discovered that says that your immune system has to get worse as you get older. It gets worse as you get older because it is exposed to more and more stuff that causes it to be injured, that it remembers those bad memories. And those can be toxins, they can be infections, they can be bad experiences, they can be trauma. All of those things are recorded in your immune system. So what we need to do is replace those immune systems that are called senescent cells with new, young, live, naive cells, so that we start putting ourselves on the other lane of the road, back to rejuvenation and away from decay.
It's interesting because as you were saying that also, I was just thinking, it's like people thinking that their immune system gets worse over time. But if giving birth and, the first, let's say, 13 to 15 years of a human's life of conditioning the immune system, especially in the first 3 years of picking things up, licking the floor, anything, eating anything in sight. If that teaches us anything, I mean, it does make logical sense that it should actually get stronger and stronger, but with the interactions of the world, environmental toxins and things like that would be the thing that could hold it back. So instead it's getting stronger. So very interesting. I hadn't ever thought of it from that way. So one thing I want to touch on is something I heard about a while back, which was Th2 dominance and Th1 and Th2, and how people with autoimmunity and various conditions often have Th2 dominance. And I just want to run past an analogy that I put together, and I'd love to hear your take on it. So for anyone listening, is that Th1 is like the army soldiers and Th2 is like the artillery. And when your immune system's on hyper alert, such as you have liver issue and you have high histamine problems and whatnot, your your immune system artillery is firing like crazy, but there's no soldiers arming the guns properly. So they're firing wherever, giving you autoimmunity and intolerances. Would you say that's quite a close analogy, or how would you correct that?
You know, I personally, I tend to shy away from militaristic, warlike metaphors because I think it sets us up to think of our life as a battle and kind of warlike activity with our environment, including those around us, which to me is not healthy psychologically. So I can understand the metaphor, so I certainly feel it is appropriate, but I try to stay away from those kinds of things. What I try to really get people to understand is that our immune system is unbelievably intelligent, and it has a mastery that we still are only starting to fully understand and appreciate in its ability to set us against all odds in our universe to have 100 or more years of healthy living. And it's doing so to fight against the odds. The odds are that we don't survive. That would be the natural thing to happen, that we just kind of fall apart over time. But our immune system is there to make sure that that doesn't happen if we just give it the right stuff. So we have not only Th1 and Th2 lymphocytes, but we also have M1 and M2 macrophages. So we have two levels of systems that help to know what to do at what time. One is the early morning system. That's what's called the innate immune system. That's the M1 and M2 macrophage. And then we have the second level of defense, if needed, which is the thymus-dependent lymphocytes, which is the Th1 and Th2 side. And if all of them are communicating correctly, it's amazing what we can sustain good health through. We can be exposed to all sorts of viruses and bacteria. We can be injured. We can you've seen people come back from the signs of death that you can't even believe that they'll be able to recover because the magic of their body is fully able to perform. And so my thing, it's all about resilience and it's about balance. That's why we actually formed this company, Big Bold Health, 4 years ago, because I was so committed in this last phase of my professional life to try to understand more how we can get the function of this immune system to actually be our friend, and we can own our immune system rather than become a victim of our immune system. So I can understand the kind of artillery analogy, but I want to get people to think of it really as an immune system that's there to do all it can to be our friend. We just have to feed it and think about it and treat it correctly.
Thank you for reframing that for me, because I'm not one to watch films where there's murder or killing or anything, and I think we subject ourselves to so much rubbish, and our unconscious mind can't differentiate between reality and what we see on the TV. So, as soon as you said, I don't like to think of it as an army or a war, it just kind of resonated with me straight away. So thank you for leaving me with something to think about from another angle. But instead it could be protectors, and it's like, as you were saying that, I'm just looking at the screen behind you, the Big Bold Health, and it's like, well, actually, that's a positive affirmation right there, if I've ever heard anything. And it's almost, go forward, bold, and be healthy, opposed to thinking about a war. And so, thank you for that. I really appreciate that, actually. So, what has been your most profound discovery along the way?
My most profound discovery is the recognition that we really can control a lot of our health that we thought was maybe a consequence of our genes. When I went through school, all the way back to early school, say elementary school, the dominant theme that I learned was that genes controlled everything, and we couldn't do anything about our genes. We just got the luck of the draw. And if we just were fortunate to have had biological parents that produced good genes, that yahoo, celebrate. But if we were unfortunate and had parents that somehow didn't have the right genes, then we were not as fortunate. And so that was kind of a deterministic model. It's like everything was already established. You just kind of had to live through the outcome. I didn't even get a chance to fill out an application card. It was just given to me. And I think the biggest change over those years now, and in my life of 78 years, this has been a kind of remarkable change, and it's because it's occurred over the last 20 or 25 years, is that we recognize that, yes, we have our genes. Our genes tell us what we can be, but they don't tell us who we will be. There are many we's that are potential within our genes. And so the we that becomes us will be an outcome that relates to how we're treating our genes. What is our environment? What is our lifestyle? Who do we hang out with? What kind of conversations do we have? What are we exposed to? Do we get sleep? Do we get exercise? Do we have the glory of joy of living? Do we see the environment as friendly? Do we see at a spiritual level something that is more than us? And all those things are messages. They're signals that feed our genes. So you can feed your genes with those good things that then create a good outcome, or you can feed your genes with alarm and hate and rage and toxins and dysbiosis and ultra-processed foods. And what will that lead? Those same genes then will express themselves in a different way, and it'll be a different you. You look different, you act different, you think different, and you are different. The genes never changed. It was what changed was how you were treating your genes. That's the big, huge change in thinking over the last, certainly in my lifetime.
Amazing. So again, as you're saying this, I'm thinking back to previous conversations I had, and one thing I read actually was in, again, Sachin Panda's book, The Circadian Code, and we discussed it, was that your certain genes downregulate, especially the ones around insulin roughly after sunset. So you produce, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, around 30% of the insulin within an hour or two after sunset, because the genes downregulate because they need sunlight to upregulate. And so therefore, if you eat too far after sunset, you don't produce the insulin at the rate you should, so your blood sugar stays higher for longer and therefore through the night, which then tanks your heart rate variability and your recovery through the night. And that's just one example of something that we are subjected to. Like, for instance, in the studio right now, it's 5:30 in the evening. I've got bright lights in front of me and my circadian clock is being screwed as a result. But that's just one example, isn't it? That how one thing that isn't related to health, traditional mindset, light, even though it's probably one of the most fundamental things, in my opinion, these days, has such an impact on our genes. So it ties into what one of the biggest things through your journey. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think you just said it there, Tim. I compliment you, because if, and you said it beautifully, you said it's not traditionally considered to be part of our health. No, it's not traditionally considered part of our disease. Mm-hmm. It's always considered part of our health. And that's the rub. That's the difference, is that what do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on what I consider the down and in concept of I don't want to get a disease? That's a very negative topic. Most people don't want to hang out talking about disease. It's not that fun. It's much more fun to talk about health and vitality and energy and capabilities. So where do we put our energy there? We think about all those things that feed into it, like sleep, like light, like circadian eating, like what are we eating, like how are we talking, with whom are we talking, what ideas are we expressing, how do we connect into nature? All those things are signals that are actually feeding into the goodness of health, which is a lot more fun to hang out with than the worry of disease.
Yeah, interesting point. So is there a shocking statistic that highlights the impact of how the world is today in health? Is there anything that comes to mind if your gut went to one statistic that was like, I cannot believe this? What would it be?
That over the age of 40, people have at least one chronic illness, the majority of people, and over the age of 60, people have two or more chronic illnesses. That was not the case until the last 30 years. And so, and now, of course, it's starting to actually impact our life expectancy. COVID had a very dramatic impact upon mean average life expectancy, but now, even post-COVID, it hasn't come back. We still have a diminished life expectancy, because eventually this burden of chronic disease starts to actually influence how long we'll live, not just the quality of our life, but also the years of living. So I think those are the dramatic changes that we've seen over the last, certainly within my my adult lifetime.
Yeah, I wanted to look up the statistic as you're saying that, because this is the statistic that I still can't quite get my head around. But on average, American adults are on around 4 prescription medications daily. Yeah. And through this, it varies with age and with status. Older adults, 65 plus, tend to take more, with an average of 4.3 to 5 medications daily due to managing multiple chronic conditions. Meanwhile, nearly 24% of US adults take 4 or more medications a day, highlighting growing reliance on prescriptions managing health issues. It's quite a statistic, isn't it, when you think about that? 4.3 to 5 medications on average, when you think 100 years ago, we wouldn't have had any. And I think, you talked about anti-inflammatories or drugs that reduce inflammation. One thing that always, whenever I hear inflammation, is obviously Clint Ober's work around grounding. And I always remember the red blood cell under dark field microscopy before and after grounding of 40 minutes, of how the blood's clumped together before and then equidistant afterwards, and what that does for blood flow and inflammation in the body, and the thermography scans for so it's just, I think, for instance, looking at my family and something or other happened to my grandfather, he had inflammation issues and whatnot, simply spending more time in the garden, doing the gardening that he loved so much, instead of taking all these drugs. It seems crazy how humanity has gone backwards and yet so far forwards, like you said, in urgent care. It's fantastic. It has saved me before, and I'm very grateful for that. But it just seems funny how traditional medicine is here, functional medicine is here, and together they work superbly, and yet the non-functional side kind of says, keep away. I'm wondering how long this is until, it's not an additional course to study functional medicine. It's part of the syllabus for standard doctor's training. And what do you think it would take to get it to that?
Well, I think your point is well taken. And, I was kind of, if you would have asked me this question 20 years ago, because I've been in this field now for longer than I can believe. I actually just recognized a month ago, I was giving a lecture to doctors, and it struck me as I was talking that it was the same month and the same week that I gave my first lecture to doctors 50 years ago. So I've had 5 decades of educating in this field, which just blew me away to think about half of a century. I would have never thought it just kind of came out of nowhere. Anyway, for me, the first 20 years of that 50, or maybe even 30 years of that 50, was pretty much an uphill grind, trying to talk to people about this concept. There wasn't a lot of receptivity. There was always a minority of individuals that would continue to keep the flame alive. But since the last 20 years, particularly the last 10 years, this is an accelerating change. We now have functional medicine at the Cleveland Clinic, arguably one of the top medical institutions in the United States, which is exciting.
Amazing.
We have it at the Mayo Clinic now, which is another very, very well-respected medical institution in the United States. We have now a variety of different governmental high-level or agencies that are endorsing functional medicine, one of which is our Veterans Administration, with our service people coming back, and they can now get functional medicine care that's covered under our Veterans Administration Reimbursement Act. So we are seeing some really interesting trends towards adoption now, which I'm very encouraged. And I just this weekend actually had a meeting with several hundred medical doctors. It was our annual Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute meeting. And I was very excited to see how many of the audience, of the hundreds of people that were there, were younger, starting into their career, and were really interested in bringing these concepts into their practice and group practice and in institutional practice, and really starting to frame what I think will be the critical mass that's necessary to change the paradigm.
So we're sold a lot of immune boosting promises which never really deliver, and a lot of juice cleanses and juice diets. But your work is looking into immunorejuvenation, obviously. And What do you think are the biggest levers that we can pull to improve our immune health?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. So, first of all, I'm not a believer in the concept of immune boosting because there is really no data ever that I can find that demonstrates that nutrition boosts the immune system. And in fact, there may be cases where you really don't want to boost the immune system. If you have a system that's already imbalanced with producing too much inflammation, you don't want to boost those cells that are producing inflammation. What you want to do is you want to rebalance the immune system. That's what we call the immunorejuvenation. And fortunately now we're learning from history how cultures have historically done that. And, I have a good friend and colleague that I have a great amount of respect for, Dan Buettner. Dan Buettner is in the States the person who kind of came up with he did, came up with the concept that there are these regions in the world where people live to be 100 years of age or older very frequently. He called them the blue zones because when he put them on a map, he used a blue Sharpie pen to circle them. So these blue zones, like Costa Rica and certain places in the Philippines and the Vilcabamba and in the Himalayas and Costa Rica and even a city in Los Angeles County, Loma Linda, which sounds almost amazing that you could have a blue zone in the middle of Los Angeles County. But those people in that county are of a religious disposition called Seventh-day Adventists that believe in vegetarianism and no alcohol and no stimulants. And so we see these characteristics of these cultures whose immune systems are actually not aging like the immune systems of their neighbors that are doing things differently. And there is just a recent paper that was fascinating that reviewed the immune system capability of the oldest person they could find in Italy. He was 126 years old. And they found that his immune system, when they studied it, was equivalent to a person in their 40s. And so it begs the question then, what are the things that you can do to prevent immune senescence and to keep rejuvenating your immune system? And things like eating diets that are basically rich in whole organic plant foods that have a lot of colors. My colleague, Dr. Deanna Minnick, has coined the term the rainbow diet, that we should be trying to eat natural foods that are colored because that's where these nutrients are found that have abilities to support our immune system and to rejuvenate our immune system. And so it's not just vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc. Those are certainly important nutrients for our immune system, but it's also the full complement of a diet that takes out the toxins that are associated with ultra-processed foods and replaces them with things that people eat in these blue zones. And that's what we've been studying, is how do these foods, one that we've landed on is an ancient about 3,000-year-old food called Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, which no one was growing it in the United States. And I became very interested in it. Now we're the only farmers of Tartary buckwheat organic in the United States. I never thought I'd own an organic farm, but that's how it goes. And so, there's all sorts of things we're learning to couple together the science of cellular biology with the things that cultures do that lead to long, healthy lives with immune systems that are serving them well for 100 years. That's what we all want.
It's interesting because I obviously I've read about the blue zones, and I also watched the Netflix documentary series, and it's very, very interesting because when you look at it through, I guess, and I come in at the let's say biohacking angle, but these days more health optimization and functional medicine and whatnot intertwined. Obviously, I don't have a bias at all, and I have no medical qualifications to lose, or should I say, to be jeopardized by speaking my mind. But one thing that I noticed from the blue zones was that they all involved movement, and they all involved community, and they all involved low toxins, immune health, liver health, and digestive health, and sunlight. Or most of them had a good portion of sunlight. So upregulating so many processes, but also not living in a city which is burdening our livers more than anything else because of the water, because of the air, because of everything around us. So it's very, very interesting. I think it's really obvious at this point that, city life, and I choose to live in London. My home is optimized, but I do choose to live here. It's my poison that I choose, I guess, for now, until I bring a child into the world, and then it would be a beach. But the point is, it's really funny how obvious it is when you're in this space, or should I say immersed in this space, how obvious it is what we're doing is completely bonkers. And the things that we should be doing are pretty obvious. And yet the system that should know this doesn't even talk about it.
Yeah, all those solutions are wired into our genes. We just have to allow the intelligence to be fully expressed. And what we do is we put our genes into a position of threat. And our genes then will respond to threat. That's what they're supposed to do to allow us to survive. And they do so by fighting back. And what's fighting back? It's inflammation. The color red, the color of war. And it produces inflammation as rubor, choler, and dolor. It's swelling, tissue swelling, pain, and redness. And so that's the kind of moniker of today's society, because our immune system, through our genes, has been pushed to try to defend us against the hostility of our environment, our lifestyle, and the things that we should know better to get away from.
I would love to ask you a question on one thing. What do you think of castor oil? I know it's a random one, but because for inflammation, for instance, I've heard that it's actually quite handy for inflammation to have a castor oil pack and a hot water bottle. But I was wondering if you could have your take on it from a functional medicine approach.
Well, I think the castor bean, from which castor bean oil is derived, has a variety of interesting phytochemicals in it. Some of them are definitely immune active. So if you talk about like organic, minimally processed castor bean oil, that's a little bit different than the highly processed oil where you've taken out all the stuff. And the castor bean oil is kind of an interesting composition of fatty acids because it's got a lot of saturated semi-long chain fatty acids that don't oxidize, so it doesn't get rancid, and it can be used in heating temperatures. But I think that there are much better ways in terms of oils to modulate inflammation. I think the omega-3 fatty acid families are much more pro-immune than castor bean oil. So I would say that one of the things that we've learned, and I was just actually in northeast Greenland and had a chance to visit the original village that Bang and Dyerberg had done their studies on the Greenland Eskimos and the impact that they're very high fat, 80% of their calories coming fat, but they weren't getting heart disease because they were eating these very rich diets in these omega-3 fatty acids. So I think that there are things that with regard to the type of fat that are really important that relate to our immune system. And so to me, the omega-3 fats kind of are on my top of the shelf list.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So tell me, where do you think functional medicine goes from this point? Like, where do you think it's going?
Well, I think where it's going is it's becoming a distributive system. And I think it's very exciting because it's being applied by all types of individuals that have health interest, all the way from specialty medicine down through general practice to health coaches to just health conscious consumers. It's accessible to anyone. That's why I think it can have great adoption. Because the concepts of functional medicine, the concepts that underlie it, are really fundamentally built around principles that go back in time memoriam to traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedism. All these various forms of healthcare have, in fact, I gave a lecture in Beijing a number of years ago to the Beijing University Medical Center, and the chief of staff there, who is ostensibly one of the top medical people in all of China. When I finished my presentation, which was translated into Mandarin, he said to me, it's very nice to have you here and to listen to you because you seem to be the first person from the United States that understands traditional Chinese medicine. That was his view of functional medicine.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was quite a compliment, actually. So I think that that's why functional medicine is catching on, because it's acceptable and accessible to virtually anyone. It can be applied as a conceptual approach by all sorts of people. So it's not just going to be owned by people who get reimbursed by the National Health Service.
Well, you've already had such a huge impact on the world, on the medical space, where it's going in the future. But what do you want your legacy to be, both within functional medicine and beyond?
Oh boy, that's a really interesting question. I could either respond to you from a left hemisphere of my brain, analytic, reductive, or from a right hemisphere of my brain, more emotional. And I guess I'm going to take the right hemisphere of my brain. So this weekend, I mentioned that I had this meeting, our annual big meeting, and I had this woman come up to me at the end of the meeting. This is a little bit, I guess, I don't know, personal, but I think people can identify with it. She came up with me. She was a doctor from Boston, in the east of the United States. And she was very enthusiastic, I could tell, wanted to tell me something. And she had written something out. She had been in this meeting for 2 days, listening to this whole review of functional medicine, the progress that's being made. And she had written out something she wanted to say to me. And she started to read from her written piece, which was front and back of a small piece of paper. And then she started to deeply cry. And then she put her arms around me. There was a whole crowd of people around us, by the way. This was quite a dramatic moment for me. And she read this story that she had composed during the 2 days about how this way of thinking had saved her as a medical doctor and as a person, so that she now felt that she was really helping people get well, that it wasn't that she was just a drug salesman, that she was finding her peace and her place in the world and why she went to medical school, and that for the first time in her life, she really felt fully enriched with all the time and energy she spent in her training and what she had gone through, and she was raising her family this way, and they'd all benefited. And I mean, it was a very emotional moment. Mm. And I recognize at that moment, that is my legacy. Mm-hmm. You only need a couple of those in your life, if you're fortunate, to make it all make sense. You don't need it to happen every day. Yeah. You just need a few. Mm. And that was it for me right there.
What a lovely story. Thank you for sharing. So I've got two very quick ones. Who is someone that you look up to in the health space?
Oh, gee, I have a whole group of people that I could say, I mean, you already named one, Mark Hyman. He's, he considers me his older brother, which is a huge compliment. We've been together now for the better part of 25 years. And when I first met him, he was just an emergency room doctor. And he would say he was very unhealthy, and he was on a path to, he felt, not the right way. And then he picked up on functional medicine, and now he is the paragon of health and taken this model much farther than I would have ever imagined. So I would say Mark Hyman. Another is Patrick Hanaway, Dr. Hanaway, who is a remarkable physician who was the lead physician at the Cleveland Clinic in building out the functional medicine clinic there, which is now a large clinic in 10,000 square feet in the Cleveland Clinic Center that is booked up for a year and a half, with a lot of the patients that are in that clinic are the families of the faculty of Cleveland Clinic, the medical staff. Mm. Another would be Dr. David Jones, who was a young Turk like I was 30 years ago that we met, and actually 35 years ago. And we formed the functional medicine model together, he being a clinician, me being the kind of intellectual driving force, and we've combined our forces together. And I watched how he treated his patients. I was in the exam room with he and his patients many times over the decades, and I got a good model as to how this can really be delivered by a caring practitioner. Another you mentioned, who is actually, I'm very proud to say, one of my students was Kara Fitzgerald, who I think is this next generation coming up. That's a leader. Another is Dr. Deanna Minnick, who was again one of my students, who's now doing her own thing, the Rainbow Diet, traveling the world and really teaching people how to eat right for functional status. So I could go on, but those are certain people that I have great admiration and respect for.
Amazing. And I'm sure they would say the same. I'm sure they do say the same for you as well. So my final question is, if there was a guest or a speaker, anyone that you think I should interview next, who do you think I should interview?
Well, I'm not sure if you've had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Patrick Hanaway, but if you have not, I would put him on your list, because he was just recently ordained as a shaman after 10 years of study in Mexico. And he is one of the brightest, most capable, research-oriented family docs that you will ever meet in the world. He's a model for what medicine should be.
Amazing. Thank you for the recommendation. I will make sure we reach out to him. So, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, thank you so much for coming on today. It has been an amazing episode for me personally, and I'm sure for the listeners too. And I really appreciate your time and everything you are doing for the world. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to have the chance to share these thoughts with you. And I just want to compliment you for taking this message out to the world and people that need. I think it's all about education. We need to allow people to understand that there are other ways that they can take control of their health. And you're doing a really good job of getting that message out. So thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot. You've been listening to the Health Optimization Podcast, and I'm Tim Gray. Comment and leave the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel to see more. See you next time, and remember, please let's spread the health.